Thanksgiving had never been a big deal to me. Growing up, it was just another day, sometimes with extended family over, but more often a quiet evening with a store-bought pie and a movie. This year, I planned to spend it alone with takeout and a book. But Roger from accounting, quiet, polite, and a bit socially awkward, invited me to his house for Thanksgiving dinner. I don't know why I accepted. Roger was pleasant enough, but we weren't exactly friends. But he was insistent, almost pleading, and I could see how much it meant to him. You really should come. My wife, Lena, is preparing a whole spread. Besides, he added with a strange smile, you'll be our honored guest. The house was farther out than I'd expected, almost isolated, down narrow roads that twisted away from the main town and deeper into the woods. The structure itself was unsettling, a two-story house that looked as though it had been built generations ago and hardly touched since. Roger greeted me at the door, a bit too enthusiastically, his eyes darting to something behind me before he ushered me inside. Lena was waiting in the dimly lit entryway, a forced smile plastered on her face. She held her hands tightly together, knuckles white. "Welcome," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We're so happy to have you here." Her eyes flickered briefly toward Roger, who nodded approvingly. The dining room was dim, with only a few candles casting shadows across the worn wood of the table. The dishes were mismatched, some chipped, and the food had a strange, unappetizing look, like it had been thrown together without care. Turkey that looked a bit too pale, stuffing that was almost gray. Roger insisted I sit at the head of the table. "Our special guest," he repeated, the emphasis on special lingering a bit too long. Roger and Lena were oddly formal, and their questions grew personal quickly. Where my family was, how I spent my weekends, what my favorite routines were. They exchanged strange looks, Lena's hand twitching nervously with each answer, as though each response held some hidden significance. I could feel something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. As we ate, the air felt thick, suffocating. They insisted I try everything, and while I forced down a few bites, my stomach twisted at the bland, undercooked flavors. Roger raised his glass for a toast. "To new family traditions," he said, fixing his gaze on me with a look so intense I couldn't look away. Throughout the meal, I noticed strange details. A broken picture frame on the mantel, the photograph it once held turned upside down on the shelf, a set of dusty toys stacked in a corner, covered in a thin layer of grime. The air in the house felt stale, with a faint metallic scent that made my skin crawl. I excused myself to use the bathroom, needing a moment away from the unnerving atmosphere. In the dim hallway, I saw a closed door at the end, slightly ajar, with a faint flicker of light from inside. I couldn't help but peek through the gap, and what I saw made my breath catch. It was a small room, cluttered with old, dust-covered items. In the center of the room sat a photo of me. It was a candid shot, something I hadn't known was taken, showing me laughing with friends from a night out. A shiver ran down my spine. I backed away, returning to the dining room with a forced smile, but I was tense, on edge. Roger was watching me closely, his expression unreadable. He seemed to know I had seen something, but he didn't mention it. Instead, he asked, "You're not feeling sick, are you? You're looking a bit pale." Lena served dessert, a lumpy, undercooked pie that looked barely edible. Roger and Lena kept staring at me as I forced down a small bite, the gritty texture scraping against my throat. As the meal dragged on, I grew more anxious, my mind racing with questions. Why was there a photo of me in that room? How long had Roger been watching me? I glanced at my watch, planning an excuse to leave, but the hands were frozen. I pulled out my phone, only to see that it too had mysteriously drained. "I think I should get going," I said, my voice shaky. "It's getting late, and I have work tomorrow." "Oh, but we haven't had our second toast," Roger said, his smile twisting into something darker. His voice was calm, but his hand gripped his glass tightly, his knuckles white. "Stay just a little longer, won't you?" Before I could respond, Lena got up, her face suddenly tense. "I'll get the good wine," she said softly, her voice almost mechanical. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone with Roger, whose gaze bore into me with an unsettling intensity. The silence stretched on, broken only by the faint sounds of clinking glassware in the kitchen. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to keep a neutral expression. "It's so nice to have someone like you join us," Roger said, his tone oddly formal. "We've been looking for the right guest for quite some time." Lena returned with a bottle, and they poured me a drink, watching intently as I lifted the glass to my lips. Something felt wrong. I faked a sip, letting the liquid barely touch my lips, but they seemed satisfied, exchanging another look. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. Roger stiffened, his face flashing with a look of annoyance, or maybe fear. He glanced at me, then at Lena, who was trembling slightly. Roger stood slowly, his movements tense. "Stay here," he said, his voice cold, almost threatening. He moved toward the door, his footsteps heavy against the creaking floorboards. As soon as he was out of sight, Lena leaned over to me, her voice a frantic whisper. "Please, go. Now while he's distracted." Her eyes were wide with terror, and she shoved a set of keys into my hand. Heart pounding, I slipped out of my chair and crept down the hallway out of sight. I fumbled with the keys, making my way to the back door. Behind me, I could hear Roger's voice, low and angry, speaking to whoever was at the front door. Outside, the night was dark, the cold air biting against my skin as I stumbled through the yard. I reached my car, hands shaking as I tried each key, praying one of them would fit. Finally, the lock clicked, and I slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors immediately. As I started the engine, I saw Roger emerge from the house, his face twisted with rage. He started toward the car, his eyes wild, but I threw it into gear and sped down the long, winding driveway. I didn't stop driving until I reached home, my mind reeling with what had happened. I sat in silence, trying to process everything. The strange looks, the photograph, the odd toasts. It all felt like some surreal nightmare. Back at home, still shaken, I found a note in my pocket. The note Lena had shoved into my hand along with the keys. In shaky handwriting it read, "They chose you. Watch your back." In the following days, my routine was haunted by reminders of that night. The disturbing details replayed endlessly in my mind. Just as I convinced myself I had imagined it all, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a simple silver frame holding a family photo of Roger, Lena, and me, sitting at that Thanksgiving table, frozen in forced smiles as if part of their family.